Today's video will be the final part in the series of going over the lore of the multiplayer characters in the Assassin's Creed games. Before I get started with the first character, I just quickly want to say thank you to all my channel members for the generous ongoing support, as it is greatly appreciated. With that said, let us begin with the first character. Alejandro Ortega de Marquez was a Spanish privateer and member of the Templar Order who operated throughout the Caribbean. During his career, he seized several small islands in the name of King Philip V of Spain. There were also rumours that at one point he spent about a year living among the Taino people, possibly even marrying a Taino woman and fathering children with her. Despite that, Alejandro later led an attack on a Taino settlement and was killed during the battle that followed in 1707. Because of his work at sea, Alejandro was rarely at home, and some of his children, like Lucia Marquez, grew up without ever meeting him. As a result, the family often struggled financially, forcing them to fend for themselves on the streets. Researchers at Abstergo Entertainment have also speculated that Alejandro may have been the father of Apia Apito. If that theory is correct, it would mean that Lucia and Apia were actually half-sisters. Parry Crowther was the kind of pirate who truly lived up to the old-fashioned image of a buccaneer. He leaned into the gentlemanly side of the term, carrying himself with a charm that helped disguise the more serious side of his work. With such a laid personality, Parry could easily shift between roles, using his charisma to cover his true dealings. Even though he had an intimidating presence and a strong taste for drink, he was known to be warm and easygoing when he was among friends. Adrian Flood was an Irishman who spent part of his childhood in an orphanage in Cork, where he had been left as a baby. When he was 8 years old, he managed to escape and hid aboard a ship heading for the West Indies. Not long into the journey, the vessel was attacked by the pirates of Kumi Burko. After the raid, Adrian was taken in by the crew and eventually earned his place among them. He first worked as a deckhand and later as a spy, using his small size and agility to slip into tight spaces and gather useful information. As he grew older, however, a rougher side of his personality started to show. Adrian became increasingly sarcastic and disrespectful, and he developed a cruel streak. Because of this, he was eventually put to work as both a disciplinarian and a torturer within the crew. By the time he was 18, Alphonse had taken a job aboard a merchant brigantine and travelled to the West Indies. After the death of his patron, he inherited the business and went on to establish the de Morigo plantation in Martinique. As his fortunes grew, Alphonse began to distance himself from his modest beginnings. He started claiming French heritage and even adopted the noble title of Comte to reinforce his image. Later on, he crossed paths with a young, talkative stowaway named Charlie Oliver. Taking a liking to the boy, Alphonse gifted him a tricorn hat. Unsure what else to do with him, he eventually introduced Charlie to the Templar Order. Renato Aguilar was a Templar born in Spain and into an influential branch of the Bourbon dynasty. Trained in the art of la verdadera destreza, he developed into a highly skilled swordsman and a keen student of strategy. Renato believed the discipline was the highest form of education and saw it as one of the Templars' greatest tools in their struggle against the assassins. Driven by this belief, he travelled to the Spanish colonies across Central and South America with the goal of spreading his technique and teachings. His commitment to this mission was so intense that it eventually strained and ended his relationship with Felicia Marino, something Renato would later come to regret. Dominique Jean was the niece of a voodoo houngan and grew up in Saint Dominique under his caring guidance. Raised in that environment, she developed into a sharp and imaginative thinker. Dominique often enjoyed working with others and was known for her ability to collaborate, but anyone who crossed her quickly learned just how dangerous she could be. When she was 16, she met Kumi Burko, and the two shared a short-lived relationship. However, it didn't last long, as Kumi eventually left the island, bringing their time together to an end. Kawali was an Aztec warrior from Mexico who chose to take to the sea, leaving his homeland behind to fight against the Spanish conquest spreading throughout Central America. Although he often struggled with homesickness and came to realise that life aboard a ship didn't suit him, his determination to continue the fight never wavered. Along the way, Kawali encountered several assassins and killed them, as he strongly rejected their vision for the world. Even after his own community was destroyed, he managed to survive. In time, he joined a growing group of native Templars who were working toward restoring peace and order in the region. Lucia Marquez was born in Spain in 1689 and was the daughter of the privateer Alejandro Ortega de Marquez. Because of his constant absence and his eventual death, Lucia was left to fend for herself at a young age. By the time she was 12, she was living on the streets, supporting both herself and her sisters by begging, borrowing, and stealing whatever she could. During those years, she became close friends with Felicia Marino, and the two often teamed up to pull off the more profitable heists. When Lucia was 17, she tried to steal a horse from a high-ranking Templar, but was caught in the act. Rather than face prison, she chose to accept training within the order. Lucia and Felicia were both eventually brought into the Templars, though their friendship began to fade not long afterward. Over time, Lucia proved herself through a series of trials and adventures, eventually becoming a respected member of the order, and being entrusted with one of the 5 unique Templar keys. In July of 1715, Grandmaster Torres received a map from Edward Kenway that revealed the locations of several assassin bureaus across the West Indies. Lucia, along with a small group of elite Templars, were tasked with tracking down the leaders of these hideouts and eliminating them. She travelled to Grand Cayman, where she stayed in the home of her trusted associate Vargas, and began searching for her target, Apia Apito, by sending ships out to scout the surrounding waters. Eventually, however, Lucia herself was tracked down by Apia and Edward, who wanted the Templar key that she carried. After hearing that the pair had arrived in Grand Cayman, Lucia fled to Pinos Isle. Her plan was to spark a conflict between Apia and the island's inhabitants, who had formed an uneasy truce with her years earlier. After learning about Pinos Isle from Vargas, Apia and Edward pursued her there. As night fell, Lucia hid among the island's ruins, but once her men had been taken out by the pirate and the assassin, she was forced to reveal herself. She fired at Apia in an attempt to keep her at bay, but the move left her vulnerable, allowing Edward to strike the fatal blow. With her final breaths, Lucia lamented what she saw as the wasted potential of the islands, claiming that the Taino lacked the knowledge to make use of their resources and would miss out on wealth and freedom. Apia angrily rejected this idea, insisting that her people had always lived freely without such ambitions. Kumi Burko was the son of a chief from the Ashanti Empire and spent his early years surrounded by wealth and influence. That life changed dramatically after a territorial dispute led to his capture. He was sold into slavery and transported to Jamaica, where he remained until the Maroon warrior Kudjo freed him from during a raid on a plantation. After gaining his freedom, Kumi joined the Maroons. Eventually, Kumi gathered his own crew and secured a ship, setting out on a career as a pirate. He and his crew attacked ships throughout the Caribbean, building both a reputation and a fortune. Among those sailing with him were Charlie Oliver, a young stowaway known for constantly sneaking pieces of Kumi's loot, and Adrian, an orphan who had hidden away on one of the vessels Kumi's crew had captured. Being much older, Kumi often teased Adrian, especially about his trousers, and much to the boy's annoyance, gave him the surname Flood. During his travels, Kumi also spent time in Saint Dominique, where he met Dominique Jean, a lively young woman who was the niece of a voodoo houngan. The two shared a brief relationship, but it ended when Kumi eventually left the island and continued his journeys at sea. Hilary Flint was born in 1682 as the third son of an aristocratic family. From an early age, he stood out as the black sheep of the household. Rather than fitting into the expectations placed on him, Hilary preferred to spend his time alone, studying mathematics and science. Before long, he developed a fascination with explosives, an interest that earned him a reputation as the family's problem child. Hoping to steer him into a more respectable direction, his parents sent him to a military school during his teenage years. There, Hilary's easygoing nature helped him fit in quickly. He joined several clubs and became involved in a few secret societies. After graduating, the connections he made eventually led him to the Templar Order, where his unusual expertise with explosives made him a very useful member. In July of 1715, Grandmaster Torres received the map from Edward Kenway that revealed the locations of several assassin encampments across the West Indies. Hilary was tasked with tracking down the leaders of these hideouts and eliminating them. His assignment brought him to Havana, where he set up operations with a squadron of soldiers and soon found himself locked in a bitter rivalry with the local assassin bureau leader, Rona Dinsmore. During one attack on Rona's bureau in 1717, Edward Kenway unexpectedly arrived and helped to drive off Hilary's forces. After the fighting ended, Edward admitted that he had unknowingly put Rona in danger by selling Torres a map that revealed her location, and that Hilary carried a Templar key Edward wanted. Realising their interests aligned, Edward and Rona decided to work together to disrupt Hilary's operations and ultimately take him down. Their investigation revealed that Hilary had been stockpiling gunpowder throughout the city as part of an escalating arms race against the assassins. Edward destroyed these hidden reserves to weaken his position, and once the advantage shifted, he and Rona moved in to eliminate him. Rona confronted Hilary directly, engaging him in combat while taunting him to keep his attention. As the fight continued, Edward slipped behind him and delivered the killing blow. With his final words, Hilary expressed regret that he and Rona had never had the chance to fight on the same side. Jing was born in 1686 to Chinese rebels and grew up developing a sharp mind for negotiation, along with a natural talent for languages. As her ambitions grew, she eventually turned away from her family's cause and married the son of a general in the Qing dynasty, someone her father strongly opposed. Through this marriage, Jing was introduced to the Templar Order and became part of it. She later worked as a diplomatic advisor, but shifting political conditions in China eventually forced her to abandon her position and flee the country. Over the next decade, Jing travelled the world as a pirate, gaining a reputation for ruthless brutality in battle. Even while living the life of a pirate, she remained committed to the Templar cause, forming alliances wherever she could to advance the Order's influence. Her loyalty eventually earned her the responsibility of guarding one of the 5 unique Templar keys. In July of 1715, Jing and several other elite Templars were assigned the mission of tracking down the leaders of assassin encampments in the West Indies and eliminating them. However, she became distracted after learning that her 2 targets, brothers Upton and Vance Travers, possessed a map rumoured to lead to a hidden treasure. Jing approached the brothers through their smuggling operation and began manipulating Vance, seducing him and convincing him that she was in love with him. With her eyes set firmly on the treasure, she persuaded him to kill his brother, Upton, and claim his half of the map. But when Vance hesitated and failed to carry out the plan quickly, Jing began to lose patience. During one of their meetings in Nassau, she confronted him about what was taking so long. Vance assured her that the problem was already being handled, claiming he had hired someone to kill Upton at that very moment. However, the attempt failed when Edward Kenway intervened after learning about Jing's scheme from Upton himself. Afterward, Jing and Vance arranged to meet again in the swamp outside Nassau. When Edward tracked them down, he killed Vance for betraying his brother. Realising what was happening, Jing tried to flee, declaring she would not share the same fate, but Edward caught up to her and assassinated her as well. With her final breaths, Jing revealed that she had already taken both halves of the treasure map for herself. The piece Edward had recovered from Vance's body was only a forgery. When Edward demanded to know where the real map was, Jing told him it was already in her husband's possession, before finally dying. Edmund developed a fascination with poisons at a very young age. He studied them obsessively and experimented whenever he could, testing their effects on everything from local animals to unsuspecting classmates. As he grew older, he refined his knowledge and eventually adopted the more respectable image of a physician. His skill and relentless dedication eventually caught the attention of the Templar Order, who recruited him into their ranks. Over time, however, Edmund grew tired of the rules and expectations that came along with being a Templar. He preferred to operate by his own standards, which often revealed a strong streak of hypocrisy. In 1784, Edmund captured Patience Gibbs and imprisoned her in Fort Washington. He was determined to obtain a charm that had once belonged to her mother, believing it allowed her to stay one step ahead of her enemies. Around the same time, Aveline de Grandplay managed to free Patience. Patience tried to escape on her own, but Edmund recaptured her and forced her to hand over the charm before leaving his men to deal with her as they pleased. Afterward, Edmund headed through the tunnels leading to Newport Tower. There he attempted to activate the charm by reciting a hymn that had belonged to Patience's mother. The attempt failed, however, because Patience had only given him half of the charm. Not long after, Aveline and Patience tracked him down and confronted him, ultimately assassinating him. With his dying breath, Edmund bitterly reflected that he had wasted his life chasing what he called a dirty piece of savagery. Felicia Marino was born into a family of thieves, and from a young age she was taught the tricks of the trade. As she grew older, she became highly skilled in disguise and sleight of hand, talents that made her especially effective at slipping in and out of places unnoticed. While her early crimes were fairly small, typical childhood pickpocketing and petty theft, Felicia eventually moved on to bigger jobs, robbing stagecoaches and stealing jewellery from nobles and even princesses. She developed a close friendship with Lucia Marquez, another young thief, and the two often teamed up to pull off larger and more daring heists. When Lucia was eventually recruited into the Templar Order, Felicia followed her into the organisation as well. Unfortunately, their once tight bond began to fade not long afterward, something Felicia would come to regret. Later on, Felicia became romantically involved with the Spanish Templar Reynaldo Aguilar. However, the relationship struggled to survive Reynaldo's intense devotion to spreading his preferred style of swordsmanship, and so it eventually came to an end. Ferreira de Ortega was the daughter of the Spanish Templar Alejandro Estrada de Ortega. Unlike her brothers, who were trained from a young age to follow in their father's footsteps within the order, Ferreira and her sisters were excluded and expected to live quiet domestic lives instead. When she was 17, her parents arranged a marriage for her with a man they had chosen. Unwilling to accept that future, Ferreira ran away from home and cut all ties with her family. From that point on, she set out to live what she called a life of adventure. She spent her time exploring and looting treasure from Maya ruins, clashing with pirates along the way, and eventually becoming a fierce pirate herself. Dacre Danu was a member of the Saint Dominique Brotherhood of Assassins, who was sold into slavery at the age of 14, and during that time he kept to his beliefs and his desire to build a better future for his people. After escaping, he came into contact with the Assassin Brotherhood and was trained by them. However, he eventually chose to leave the group in order to pursue his own path. Wanting to deepen his understanding of Haitian voodoo, he dedicated himself to its practices, believing it was key to fulfilling his greater purpose of helping shape a new world. Over time, Dacre Danu became a Hungan, rising from a junior priest to a high priest. At some point along the way, he also joined a Maroon community, taking part in plantation raids as part of their resistance. Sylvia Seabrook was the daughter of a goods trader, but from a young age, she longed for a life of adventure at sea. After her brothers were lost in the New World, she made a bold decision to disguise herself as one of them, taking on the alias Sly. She began working aboard various ships. Over time, Sylvia proved herself to be a highly capable navigator, and her skills didn't go unnoticed. The Templars eventually took an interest in her abilities and recruited her into their ranks. Charlie Oliver, who liked to call himself Charlie the Great, ran away from home when he was just 10 years old. He managed to sneak aboard a ship by hiding in a barrel of apples, which eventually took him all the way to America. There he crossed paths with Alphonse, who took a liking to him and even gifted him a tricorn hat. Still unsure what to do with the boy, Alphonse eventually introduced Charlie to the Templar Order. At some point later in his life, Charlie also spent time sailing with the pirate Kumi Burko. During his time with the crew, he became known for helping himself to their loot, often stealing from both the plunder and the men themselves. Manuel Mendoza was a mysterious figure who spent much of his life travelling the world. Over the years, he took on a variety of identities and jobs, including a stint as a pirate, before eventually settling into a quieter life as a coffee farmer. Even then though, he never stayed in one place for too long. Manuel had a habit of disappearing for extended periods, seemingly to serve some unknown cause, adding to the mystery surrounding him. Edward Thatch, who would later become known as Blackbeard, was likely born in Bristol, England around 1680. Very little is known about his early life, but he appears in historical accounts during the War of the Spanish Succession, beginning in 1701. During this conflict, Thatch served as a privateer for the Royal Navy in the Caribbean, attacking enemy ships with government approval. During his time at sea, he became acquainted with several notable figures, including Benjamin Hornigold, Edward Kenway, and Charles Vane, who would all play important roles in the pirate world. In January of 1713, Thatch and his crew came to the aid of the Amazon Galley, a ship belonging to the East India Company that was under attack by pirates from a vessel called the Emperor. The attackers were quickly defeated by Thatch's privateers, leaving only two pirates alive, Blaney and Edward Kenway. Blaney wanted to kill Kenway, but Thatch instead ordered the two to settle the matter in a fistfight. Kenway won the fight, and when Blaney tried to cheat, Thatch shot him and recruited Kenway into his crew. Later that same year, the Peace of Utrecht ended the war, and many privateers like Thatch suddenly found themselves unemployed. With no legal means of earning a living at sea, Thatch and most of his crew turned to piracy. Thatch eventually reunited with Benjamin Hornigold and developed a strong friendship with him. Hornigold convinced Thatch to serve as his quartermaster, a position he held until early 1716. In 1715, Thatch, Hornigold, James Kidd, and Edward Kenway met in Nassau to discuss plans to drive out the British garrison and transform the town into a pirate republic. As part of this plan, Thatch and Kenway captured a Spanish galleon called El Arca de Maestro and deliberately beached it near Abaco Island to act as a defensive barrier for Nassau's harbour. By 1717, Thatch had grown his beard and cultivated the intimidating persona of Blackbeard. Around this time, he took control of a ship called the Adventure, originally captained by Stede Bonnet, whom Thatch kept aboard as a protege. Soon after, Thatch captured the French slave ship Le Concorde, which he renamed Queen Anne's Revenge, in honour of the late Queen. He outfitted the powerful frigate with over 40 cannons, quickly gaining a reputation as one of the most feared pirates in the West Indies. Throughout the following years, Blackbeard encountered and assisted other pirates, including Samuel Bellamy and his allies Oliver Levasseur and Alonzo Battilla. During a battle with a British warship called the King George, he later investigated the wreckage of Bellamy's fleet after a storm, and learned more about the mysterious Templars who were attempting to control the seas. In 1718, Blackbeard and his allies in Nassau faced shortages of vital supplies, especially medicine. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Thatch attacked a British warship carrying medical supplies and later blockaded the port of Charlestown for a week, taking hostages until the town surrendered the medicine he demanded. Eventually, Thatch accepted a royal pardon from Charles Eden, the governor of North Carolina, hoping to retire from piracy. However, he soon returned to raiding ships in order to secure more wealth for his retirement. His continued piracy drew the attention of Alexander Spotswood, the governor of Virginia, who hired Lieutenant Robert Maynard to hunt him down. In late 1718, Maynard launched a surprise attack on Blackbeard's forces at Ocracoke. The ambush destroyed several ships and forced Thatch and Edward Kenway to escape aboard the Jackdaw. Realising they could not flee safely, the pirates boarded the attacking warship in a desperate attempt to seize it. Despite their efforts, they were overwhelmed by the larger British force. During the brutal fight, Kenway tried to help Thatch by throwing him a pistol, but Blackbeard was ultimately killed in the battle and then beheaded by the British. So now with the final character done, I finally completed the first series on the channel and every multiplayer character has been explained. Again, I want to express my thanks to all my channel members for their extra support to the channel. It is greatly appreciated and helps out more than you know. I hope you enjoyed the video, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.